The ruined city seemed to be gnawed by some giant beast. Into the collapsed buildings and scattered steel concrete, there was a burnt smell in the air, and the low growl that made people's skin numb, like a curse coming from the underground. Junxi squatted on the top of a half-turned mall, looking down through the broken window, and several deformed monsters on the street were biting a body that had been exhausted. The thing looks like a human but not a human. The skin is like rotten skin, and the claws are so pointed that they can easily open the steel plate. My mother is so disgusting. Junxi said in a low voice, holding a broken tablet in her hand, and a string of Chris series of Chris huge red marker, the signal he had spent 3 months repairing the mobile castle. He gritted his teeth and murmured, I can't die in this ghost place. I have to do something big. He looked down at the tablet, and the signal was finally stable, less than 500 meters away from him, just in the underground car park on the corner of the street. That was his golden finger, a mobile fortress hidden in the military base before the end of the world, and a monster-level defense vehicle that could carry nuclear weapons. Junxi didn't know why this thing would think he was the main one, but he knew that as long as he could start it, he would no longer have to hide in Tibet like a dog. Try it. Junxi gritted his teeth and took out a modified handgun from his waist. There were not many bullets, but he rushed over. He glanced at the street, the monsters still gnawed, not noticing him. There is only one chance. He flipped down from the window, his foot pointed lightly on the broken wall, and landed quietly like a cat. The scent of monsters was scattered in the wind. Junxi held her breath and moved her cat with her waist along the street with a little bit of slaughter. As he got closer to the underground car park, his heart was beating fast as if it was about to explode. Just then, a sharp roar pierced the air. Junxi turned suddenly, and a monster stared at him straight at the corner of the street. Saliva dripped from his sharp teeth, his eyes full of bloodthirsty crazy. Damn, I found it. Junxi growled and ran away. The monster let out a roar, and then it rushed over several times, and its claws caught sparks on the ground, with speed so fast that it was less powerful. Junxi ran and shot backwards, and Zibu hit the monster as if it was a slaughter, which was useless at all. He gritted his teeth and rushed into the underground cart. In the darkness, he could see a large black armored car parked there like a hill. It's it. Mobile Fortress Poker. He suddenly rushed over, pressing his palm against the identification device on the car door, and a green prompt with certification passed on the tablet finally popped up. The car door unblocked with a click sound, and the thick metal door slid open, revealing a driving room full of high-tech watches. God bless. Junxi walked in and pressed the start button with a hurry. The entire fortress shook violently, and the low engine sounded like the roar of a wild beast, which made the ground tremble. The screen lights up, showing the words Defense System starts, Weapon System stands for Operation. Outside, the monster's claws had grabbed the car door, making a harsh metal friction sound. Junxi sneered, and his fingers flew to operate on the control panel. A blue arc suddenly appeared on the outer layer of the fortress. With a snack sound, several monsters were directly electrocuted into coke and made a slap of silence. It's great. That's a tough deal. Junxi grinned, pushed down the slug, drove off the trunk, crushed the monster core on the ground, and rushed to the streets like an invincible war car. There were still several monsters on the outside, but they couldn't get close to them at all. The defensive layer of the fortress was an invisible steel wall, and no trace was left when the claws were grabbed. Just when Junxi thought she could catch her breath, a sudden burst of gunfire and cry came from across the street. He squinted his eyes and saw several survivors being attacked by a group of monsters. One of them, wearing a shaved camouflage uniform, held a machete and acted as fast as a shadow, and each knife could cut off the monster's brain. It's quite good to fight. Junxi murmured, adjusting the direction of the castle and heading towards that side. The monster group is like fish that smells bloody, and the number is increasing, and the survivors can no longer hold back. The man holding the machete slashed a monster's brain with a knife and shouted, "You run quickly. I'm on top." It's too late. A woman screamed, and a blood mark was already scratched on her legs, and she couldn't move on the ground. As the monster was about to pass, the sound of the engine of the fortress suddenly came, like a black flash crashing into the group of monsters, and several monsters were directly crushed into meat paste. "Go on the car! Hurry!" Junxi poked out from the driving room and shouted at them. The survivors were stunned for a second, then reacted immediately, and rushed towards the fortress. The man holding the machete went on the car last, covered in blood, gasping for thick air, and said to Junxi, "Thank you, brother. My name is Cheng'en. Who are you?" "Junxi." "Don't waste your time, close the door first." Junxi stepped on the gas door, and the back door of the fortress quickly closed, blocking the roar of the monster outside. He glanced at the screen and saw the monster group chasing wildly behind him, so many that it made people's skin numb. Cheng'en wiped the blood from his face and grinned, "This car is so awesome, where is it?" "It's sir," Junxi said with a slight twist, and his fingers flew on the panel. A small cannon suddenly stretched out from the top of the castle. With a bang, a cannon directly exploded and chased the most tight monsters. The minced meat and blood fog exploded, and the remaining monsters finally spread out and dared not chase them again. The survivors in the car relaxed their voices. A young girl covered her face and started crying with a small voice. A middle-aged man next to her patted her shoulder and said softly to comfort her. Cheng'en leaned against the wall of the car, watching Junxi operate the fortress, and his eyes were exploring. "You are not simple, and this car is not ordinary." Junxi ignored him and cared for nothing, saying nothing politely. "You are not bad either. Have you practiced the sword technique just now?" "After practicing, eat a bit of food." Cheng'en smiled a little coldly, his fingers holding the machete tightened slightly, and a breath flashed in his eyes. Junxi glanced at him and asked no more questions. Everyone had their own story. No one in the end of the world would take the initiative to open his heart. The fortress drove several ruins and finally stopped at a relatively safe place, a half-collapsed factory, with no monsters around it. Junxi turned off the engine and turned around to the person in the car. "You should rest first. I will check the situation of getting off the car. This place is safe at the moment, but don't run around." The survivors clicked, and several people began to help each other deal with the wound. Cheng'en didn't sit down and followed Junxi to the outside of the fortress. The two stood in the shadow of the factory, and the burnt smell could still be heard from the air. "You saved us. What are you going to do?" Cheng'en asked directly, staring at Junxi. Junxi said, "I have no plans. I have to do it at will. In this world, it is only one more person to live." Cheng'en sneered, "Put off a good guy. If you have this car, why don't you run by yourself? Do you have to worry about us?" Junxi glanced at him and said calmly, "Because I don't want to be a lonely wolf. In the last days, no matter how strong a person is, he will not live long. Are you just standing in front of you, letting others run away first?" Cheng'en was stunned for a moment, without saying a word, but just relaxed his hand holding the knife. The two were silent for a few seconds, and Junxi suddenly said in a low voice, "However, I don't think this matter is that simple. Look at those monsters, they chased them with a purpose, as if they were driven over by someone. Drunk?" Cheng'en's eyebrows became sharp, his eyes turned sharp. "Are you saying someone was deliberately making trouble?" Junxi clicked his head, took out the tablet, and adjusted a monitoring screen when he was just fighting. In the picture, there were about a few figures wearing black robes behind the monster group. Although they were blurry, they were holding strange staffs in their hands and seemed to be muttering something in their mouths. "Evil god believers." Cheng'en gritted his teeth and spit out these words, his voice filled with hatred. "These shattered people are so tempting that they are all heard by monsters. I will kill them sooner or later." Junxi raised her eyebrows and glanced at Cheng'en. "I heard you have had a date with them. Did you go?" "They killed my whole family." Cheng'en's voice was as low as he was coming out of a tooth, his eyes full of murder. Junxi didn't answer, but just patted his shoulder and turned to look at the ruins far away. "Since that's the case, we have the same goals. I don't like being fooled by people as chess pieces." Junxi grinned, with a cold light flashing in her eyes. "This car can protect people and crush enemies. If you want to, we can do something big together. Chang'an glanced at him and finally pointed, okay, I'm the only one. But I was so mean, I'm not a good person, revenge is my business, don't be tempted by me. Okay, as long as you don't cheat your teammates, I'll do you. Junxi stretched out his hand. Chang'an hesitated for a moment, and shook with him. The two men held each other tightly, as if they had made a soundless alliance in the end of the world. Along the sky, the clouds are lower, and there is nothing bigger about memorizing. Junxi looked at the darkness, with a slight brow on her eyebrows and murmured, the evil god believers. It seems that this road is not easy to walk. The factory's old iron door creaked in the wind, and the air was filled with the smell of iron and rotten. Junxi leaned against the wall of the mobile fortress, holding a tablet in her hand, and the surrounding map data was displayed on the screen. They have been parked in this ruin for a day. Although the survivors in the car are safe, they have almost no food and water. If they don't find any resources, everyone will die of dying. There is a waste supermarket nearby, less than 2 kilometers away, and there may be cans in it. Junxi pointed to a red spot on the map and said to Chang'an next to him, we have to go and touch the air. Chang'an leaned against the door, rubbing the machete in his hand, his eyes as cold as ice. There are probably monsters in the supermarket, and maybe even lines of evil god believers. Are you sure you want to take risks? No need to choose. Junxi said with a look and stuffed the tablet into his pocket. The energy in the fortress is still useful, so there is no problem in defense. As long as it is not covered, there is no big problem. Go with me and others stay. When several survivors in the car heard this, their faces were not very good. A middle-aged man couldn't help but open his mouth, then what should we do? If you can't come back, aren't we waiting to die? Junxi glanced at him, his language was calm but unquestionable. You stay in the car, the fortress defense system will automatically start, and the monsters cannot come in. Don't run, I can't save you. What did the middle-aged man want to say? A young girl pulled his sleeve and said in a low voice, stop quarrel, they are for us. The man sighed and finally stopped talking. Junxi and Chang'an looked at each other, and the two brought out the gear and jumped out of the car. The car door in the fort was locked and killed with a click, leaving several survivors in front of them. The sky outside was as dark as if it was going to be pressed down at any time. The monster's roar was occasionally heard, and the people's skin was numb. Let's go, don't be slow. Junxi patted the gun on her waist and walked towards the supermarket first. Chang'an followed behind, the machete in his hand reflected a faint light, and his eyes looked around, like a wolf ready to eat at any time. The 2 kilometers were not long, but there were collapsed roads and scattered bones from the ruins. It took the two of them half an hour to see the broken signboard of the supermarket. The outer wall of the building was already smashed into pieces by something, the glass windows were completely broken, and the inside was pitch black, like a big mouth waiting for people to come in and die. It doesn't seem to be against each other. Chang'an stopped and said softly, it's so peaceful, even the monster's sounds. Junxi clicked his head, took out the tablet, and adjusted the far distance scanning function of the fortress. There are several hot sources inside the supermarket on the screen, but the location is very scattered, unlike monsters gathering. He narrowed his eyes and said in a low voice, there may be someone, or something else. Go in and take a look and get ready to go. The 2 cats were holding their waists and touched them from the side. The shelves in the supermarket were tilted, moldy bags and dried blood were scattered on the ground, and there was a pungent smell in the air. Junxi opened the flashlight, and the light column swept through the rows of shelves, and finally found a few unsealed cans and a pack of compressed buns in the corner. It's good to have a good atmosphere, he said softly, stuffing things into his backpack. Chang'an didn't say anything, staring at the deep corner of the supermarket, and his hand holding the knife tightened slightly. It's silence. Chang'an suddenly growled and turned around suddenly. The sword light flashed and directly slashed at the shadow behind him. A sharp scream rose, and a figure in a torn black robe fell out from the shelf. The short knife in his hand fell to the ground, and there was a bloodline on his neck, his eyes wide open, full of unwillingness. Evil god believers. Junxi said softly, quickly pulled out his gun, and looked around. Sure enough, a deep spell came from the supermarket, like a murmur climbing out of the ground, which made people's head numb. Several figures in black robe walked out of the darkness, holding a strange staff in their hands, blood-red runes painted on their faces, and their eyes were full of crazy. Two little horns, dare to harm us good things. The man in black robe, who was heading, sounded like a throat was worn by sandpaper. He lifted his staff, and a black fog suddenly spread out of the air. Several deformed monsters rushed out of the fog and headed straight for Junxi and Chang'an. Damn it, let it go! Junxi gritted his teeth and quickly retreated, while shouting at the tablet, "The fortress is activated, fire support mode." His voice fell, and a low engine rush came from the factory far away. The remote system moving the fortress received the command. The small turret on the top quickly locked the supermarket location, and a cannon came in, directly smashing into the black fog. Still, the explosion of the shock wave made the supermarket shelves fall down, the black fog was blown away, and several monsters were directly blown into minced meat, and the smell of blood instantly spread. The men in black robe were overturned by the waves, and their faces were full of shock. It was obvious that Junxi still had such a hard stock. It's great! I like this firepower. Junxi grinned, and his fingers flew on the tablet quickly. The second bomber in the fortress came again, and this time he directly locked the man in the black robe. The guy reacted quickly, and with a blow of his staff, a black light formed a barrier, and he rushed down and exploded, but the whole person was still shocked and spit out blood and retreated. Don't be stunned and fuck them. Chang'an growled, his figure as fast as a shadow, and the machete in his hand swept over with a cold light. This guy is a monster. Junxi couldn't help but mutter, but the movement in his hand did not stop. The third cannon bomb in the fort came again. This time, it directly collapsed a wall in the supermarket. The man in black robe was pressed under the tiles, and screamed one after another. The man in the black robe saw that the action was not good, and gritted his teeth and shouted, "Retreat! These guys are not easy to mess with." He turned around and wanted to run away, but Chang'an would not give him a chance. He kicked his foot and rushed over like a cannon. The sword light drew a perfect arc and directly hit the back of the guy. The blood column sprayed out, and the man in black robe fell down without even yelling, his eyes wide open, full of unwillingness. "Run? I'll let you run." Chang'an sneered, wiped the blood from his face, and turned his head to look at the remaining men in black robe. They were already scared to death, their staff were broken, and they crawled out of the ground and ran out of the sling. Junxi didn't chase him, and his fingers were operated on the tablet. The gun system in the fort was activated. A thump shot was shot. Several men in black robe were beaten into squids. They fell to the ground and twitched for a while and then stopped calm. "The Qing is clean." Chang'an gasped and leaned against the shelf, the murder in his eyes still had not dissipated. Junxi walked over and patted his shoulder, "Your swordsmanship is a bit too awesome. Stop talking, just take something and leave." Chang'an replied without any hesitation, but a smile still ejaculated at the corner of his mouth. They quickly plundered resources that could be used in supermarkets, including cans, baking powder, and several bottles of mineral water that had not expired, and packed 2 backpacks. When the two returned to the fortress, the survivors in the car were already anxious. Seeing that they were covered in blood, but their backpacks were bulging, everyone relaxed. The young girl couldn't help asking, "You're okay? You just heard the explosion and scared us." "It's okay, it's a small scene." Junxi grinned and threw her backpack on the ground. "Come on, let's separate things, don't eat them." The middle-aged man took a can of cans, looked at Junxi in a complicated face, and said in a low voice, "Thank you, brother. I just owe you my mouth, so I shouldn't doubt you." "It's okay, who is not afraid of death?" Junxi held his hand without caring about it. He turned to Chang'an, and the two of them looked at each other and saw a tacit understanding in their eyes. Although the fight was astonishing, they also made them trust each other more. At this moment, a faint cry for help suddenly came from the outside of the fortress. Junxi's eyebrows were raised and the monitoring screen was adjusted. On the screen, a young woman was walking towards her, covered in blood, and she was holding an injured man in her hands. Both of them seemed to be unable to hold back. Is it the survivor again? Chang'an's eyebrows were already touching the machete with his hands. Junxi shook her head and said in a low voice, "Look at the situation first, don't rush to move." He opened the car door, poked out and shouted, "Who are you? Don't get close, tell me clearly." The woman heard the sound and raised her head, her face turned pale but her eyes were calm. "My name is Yang Wanting, it's a doctor. This person is injured and almost terrible. Can you help us?" "Doctor?" Junxi raised her eyebrows and looked at Shenzhen. In the end of the world, doctors are scarce resources. If there are teams who can cure diseases, their survival rate can be much higher. He pointed and said, "Come on, but don't be so cool, otherwise I'm not polite." Yang Wanting walked over with the wounded man in difficulty. After entering the fortress, she sat directly on the ground, panting and said, "Thank you. I thought we were dead." She quickly opened her medical bag and began to deal with the wounded man's injuries. Her movements were so familiar that people could not find any problems. Junxi looked at her busy work and asked, "What's going on with you? How did you do this?" Yang Wanting said in a low voice, "We were originally at a small point, but they were beaten by the evil god believers. They are not humans at all. They use living people as sacrifices and force us to join, otherwise they will kill everyone. I refused and escaped with a few people, but in the end we were two left." Her voice was choked, and her hands were shaking slightly, and she could not bear it when she recalled the picture. The survivors in the car heard this and their faces became difficult to see. The young girl couldn't help but whisper, "How could these bastards have such a thing?" Chang'an held the knife, his eyes were as cold as ice, and he gritted his teeth and said, "Evil god believers, I want one to kill them." His voice was filled with hatred, and it was obvious that Yang Wanting's words aroused his old hatred. Junxi patted his shoulder and turned to Yang Wanting, "Stop it first, it's safe here. Since you are a doctor, do you want to be with us? We also need someone to cure the wound." Yang Wanting was stunned for a moment and immediately said, "Okay, as long as you don't mind giving up, I'm willing to help." She reluctantly smiled. Although she was weak, her eyes were warm. The atmosphere in the car finally calmed down. Several survivors began to share food, and Yang Wanting continued to help the injured person deal with the wound. Junxi leaned against the wall and watched all this. Her heart was not completely relaxed. He took out the tablet and adjusted the monitoring screen when he was just fighting. The cursed sounds of the men in black robes in the supermarket were still rumbling around his ears, making him feel uneasy. "These guys are definitely not just playing tricks," he said to Shenzhen in a low voice. "Their actions are so organized, like someone is slutting behind their backs. Do you think there will be a bigger head?" Chang'an sneered, "No matter who he is, I will kill one, and I will kill one. One day, I will find the mess that killed my family and break him up." Junxi pointed at the head and said nothing, but just looked at the increasingly heavy Yuyun outside the window. In the end of the world, every day is fighting for life, and the evil god believers are still far away. He held the tablet tightly and swore in his heart that no matter who his opponent was, he would use this fort to crush all threats. In the car, Yang Wanting comforted the injured person with a low voice, and occasionally said a few words to other survivors, and the atmosphere slowly became warmer. Junxi looked at this scene and raised her mouth slightly, but her eyes were still deep, and there was still a cold light hidden. The battle just started, and a bigger storm was still behind. The fortress parked in the shadow of the ruins factory, and the low sound of the engine occasionally sounded, as if reminding everyone that this film was safe only temporarily. Inside the car, Yang Wanting was changing medicine to the injured person. Her movements were gentle but mature. Several survivors were surrounded by, discussing their next plans in a low voice. Junxi leaned against the driver's seat, holding a tablet in her hand. The surrounding map data was displayed on the screen, and her eyebrows were tightly locked. "There is a signal source nearby, which is quite strange. Junxi pointed to a flashing red spot on the map and said to Chen next to her, "It's less than 5 kilometers away, like some kind of encrypted communication, but it's not a monster or an ordinary survivor's equipment." Chang'an leaned against the wall of the car, rubbing the machete in his hand, and sneered, "80 Mostly the evil god believers are the ones who are shattered. They like to make these sneaky things. What do you want to do? Crush them directly? It's nice to crush it, but the information is not enough, and it's easy to get ambushed." Junxi shook her head and looked over the person in the car. "We have to figure out the situation first. Who is willing to check it out?" When the survivors in the car heard this, their faces were not very good-looking. The middle-aged man muttered in a low voice, "Check? Isn't that sent to death? The evil god believer helps people, and he will be sacrificed when he catches a living person. Who will be unlucky? Don't say a word if you're afraid of death." Chen glanced at him coldly and stood up. "I'll go. I'm eager to kill a few more of these shattered things." "Don't act, your fight is fierce, but diving is not your strength." Junxi patted his shoulder and turned to look at a thin young man in the car. His name is Gao Xiang, and he has not opened his mouth since he got on the car, but his eyes always swept away, as if he was watching the surroundings at any time, giving people a sense of a policeman. Junxi remembered that he said that he used to be a scammer. His brains were moving quickly and his hands were also quick. "Gao Xiang, what do you say? Do you want to go there?" Junxi asked directly. Gao Xiang was stunned for a moment, then grinned, revealing a mouthful of white teeth. "Okay, head. Anyway, I have nothing to do with you, and no one will cry even if I die. Give me a fixture, and I will touch it. Don't call me the head, just call it a name." Junxi gave him a silencer gun and a miniature communication device. "Be careful, please contact me if you find out, don't force me. The fortress can support you at any time." Gao Xiang took the equipment, clicked the head, jumped out of the car, and his figure quickly disappeared into the shadow of the ruins. The people in the car watched him leave, and the atmosphere was a bit stressful. Yang Wanning said in a low voice, "Is there really no problem if he goes alone? Is he okay? I will know only after I go." Junxi was calm, but her fingers kept tapping on the tablet, obviously worried. Although Gao Xiang is not right in his mouth, he has a ruthless look in his eyes, so it should not be the kind of dragging his back legs. Time passed minute by minute, and the communications were not static. Half an hour later, Junxi's patience was exhausted. He said in a low voice, "It's been too long. Thank you for your kindness, let's take it." Chang'an clicked the head and was about to get the equipment when the communication suddenly heard a hurry, which was Gao Xiang's voice, which was very low but full of tightness. "Junxi, I was discovered. This place is the point of the evil god believers. There are many people, and there are also women, like their heads, and they heard them call her Choilina. I was caught, and I was tight-knit dash." Before he could finish speaking, a whisper came from the communication device, as if the signal was smashed, and then there was only a rustling sound. Junxi's face darkened and she suddenly stood up. "Damn, I've been arrested. Save someone? That guy is looking for death by himself. What's the matter with us?" The middle-aged man spoke again, looking at his face. "We're finally safe, why are you taking risks? Close your mouth." Chen suddenly turned his head, his eyes as cold as a knife, and he scared the man to retreat. Yang Wanning stood up and said in a low voice, "I'll go with you. I can help you whenever there is an injury." "Okay, follow me, everyone else stays behind, the car door is dead, don't run away." Junxi quickly ordered, jumped onto the driving seat, and operated it on the control panel with his fingers. The engine of the mobile castle was flying up like a waking wilderness. The car body shook slightly and rushed to the red spot on the map at full speed. It took only a few minutes to reach the destination of the 5-kilometer distance. It quickly arrived at the destination, a deserted industrial area. The air was filled with bloody ruins. The surrounding buildings were painted with bloody runes, like some kind of evil ceremonial scene. Away from now on, I could see about a few men in black robes guarding outside a broken warehouse, holding a staff in their hands and lying in their mouths. the evil god believers are indeed not simple. Junxi sneered and lit out the scan system of the fortress. The screen showed that there were a large number of hot sources in the warehouse, with 20 or 30 people starting from, and several huge energy waves, as if some kind of ritual was being carried out. He gritted his teeth and said to Chen Zhen in a low voice, "Gao Xiang should be here. We can't delay, just attack. It's just my wish." Chen Zhen grinned, and the machete in his hand was impatient. Yang Wanning held the medical bag tightly, and her face was pale, but her eyes were firm. "I am ready to save people at any time, so you can rest assured." Junxi clicked his head and pressed his fingers wildly on the control panel, and a prompt for attack mode upgrade popped up on the screen. A few days ago, he unplugged a new feature, Thunder Crash Mode, in the system of the fortress, which can transform the front-end armor of the fortress into a super high-energy raid gun, specially used to break defenses and destroy large targets. Although the energy consumption is high, it is not a time to save money now. "I'm just sitting there, I'm going to use my ultimate move," Junxi shouted and pushed down the squirting rod. The deck at the front of the fortress suddenly opened, revealing a blue light muzzle, and a low buzzing sound spread in the air, as if thunder was about to descend. The man in black robe outside the warehouse obviously felt that he was not in a match, and he was constantly turning his head and his face was full of shock. "Gee!" There was a huge sound, and a wave of blue energy sprayed out from the muzzle, like a thunder directly hitting the iron door of the warehouse. The thick iron door was instantly torn into pieces, and the explosion of the slammed waves directly lifted the black-robed man around him, and several unlucky ones were directly fried into meat paste, and blood fog spread out. Half of the walls of the warehouse were blown down, revealing the scene inside. A group of black-robed men surrounded a huge blood-colored fortress, and there was a person on the fortress, which was Gao Xiang. "Awesome! This firepower is simply changing." Chen Zhen couldn't help but roar, his eyes lit up. Junxi grinned, his fingers didn't stop, and the gun system in the fortress was activated. The sound of thumps sounded up, and Zihuan burst out like a heavy rain, directly pressing the man in black robe who was trying to reverse the shot so that he couldn't lift his head. "You have to be nervous about saving people, don't fight," Junxi yelled, turning the direction, and the fortress directly crushed the ruins and headed towards the fort. The man in black finally responded, and several high-level believers raised their staff and recited strange mantras in their mouths. The black fog rose from the ground, and several deformed monsters rushed out of the fog, trying to keep the castle. "Do you dare to die like this kind of gadget?" Junxi sneered. The thunderbolt cannon in the fortress was charged again. Although its power was not as powerful as the first time, it was still a blue light that directly blown the monster into scum, and even the black fog was torn apart. Chen Zhen looked at this scene and couldn't help but whistle. "Brother, if this car is sold, my family's property will have to buy one." "Stop talking, prepare to get off the car and save people." Junxi stepped on the car with one foot, and the fortress stopped beside the fortress, and the door opened with a click. He and Chen Zhen jumped out of the car, the weapons in their hands were loaded, and Yang Wanning followed closely, holding the medical bag tightly. Gao Xiang on the fort was covered in blood, and his body was painted with strange runes, which were obviously regarded as a certain sacrifice. When he saw Junxi and the others, he raised his head reluctantly and grinned. "Damn, you are considered a matter of this. I thought you were going to become a monster. Close your mouth and save some energy." Junxi roared and rushed over and cut Gao Xiang's skeleton with a dagger. Ching Enliu was guarding the side, and the machete danced like a whirlwind. Every time a monster or a man in black robe approached, he slashed it with one knife, and the blood was filled with blood. His battle is straightforward and can predict almost every move of the other party. His swordsmanship is fast and ruthless, so no one can get close to him. "Go away, their ritual is not over, there is still marijuana." Gao Xiang was helped up and said with a heavy breath. Junxi glanced at the eyebrow and slapped her eyes to sacrifice the fort. Sure enough, the blood-colored runes were still flashing, and there was an increasingly irritating evil breath in the air, as if something was about to be summoned out. At this moment, a cold woman's voice came from the deep valley, carrying a strange sense of intimacy. a group of little zombies have ruined my good things. I really don't know how to live or die." With the sound, a woman in a long blood robe walked out slowly, with complicated runes on her face. Her eyes seemed to be able to see through a person's soul, and a sneer was hanging on the corner of her mouth. She held a black whist rod in her hand, and a red gem inlaid on the rod, radiating an unsettling light. "Are you Choilina?" Junxi narrowed her eyes and tightened her gun's hand slightly. Gao Xiang said in a low voice, "Yes, it's her. This woman is the head of the evil god believers. I just heard them say that what income ritual she is preparing for is seemingly related to the truth about the evil god's incoming." Choilina heard this and smiled lightly. The sound seemed to be able to dig into the brain. "Little guy, I heard a lot. Unfortunately, the more you know, the faster you die." She raised her stud, and a low buzzing bird suddenly came from the air. The blood-colored runes on the fort were dazzlingly bright, and the ground began to shake, as if some big existence was about to break out of the ground. "No, the ritual continues." Junxi gritted her teeth and quickly said to Chen, "Take Gao Xiang and Yang Wanning back to the car, I'll stop." He turned his head and looked at Choilina, his fingers pressed on the tablet, and the thunderbolt shocking cannon started to charge for the third time. "Want to leave?" "It's too late." Choilina sneered, and her pole slapped, and the ground suddenly cracked. Several huge black touches were diamond from the ground, carrying fishy mucus, and heading straight for Junxi and the others. Ching'an growled, and the sword flashed, directly slashing a piece of touch, but more touches were swept over, and the speed was too fast. "Go on the car! Hurry!" Junxi yelled, pressing the button on the tablet at the same time. The thunderbolt cannon in the fortress was finally charged, and a large wave of blue energy sprayed out and directly rushed towards Choilina and the sacrificial priest. The explosion shocked the entire warehouse trembled, and several touches were blown away, making a ruthless roar. Choilina was also pulled back by the waves, and her face finally became difficult to see. "This broken car is really interesting." She gritted her teeth, and there was a hint of hatred in her eyes, but she did not chase after her again, but quickly retreated back to the depths of the warehouse and disappeared into the darkness. The rune light on the sacrificial dynasty gradually dimmed, and the sacrificial strait seemed to be interrupted. "Let's go! Don't worry about her!" Junxi roared, holding Gao Xiang over to the fortress. Chen and Yang Wanning followed behind. Just as the door was closed, the fortress engine started to fly and quickly drove out of this strange industrial area. On the rear screen, a low roar was coming from the direction of the warehouse, like some kind of anger that was interrupted, but eventually he did not catch up with him. Inside the car, Yang Wanning quickly sent Gao Xiang to deal with the injury. Although he was weak, he still grinned. "Damn, I almost thought I was going to explain." "Thank you, brothers." "Stop talking, take care of the wound first." Chen replied without any worries, but the worry in his eyes could not be hidden. Junxi leaned on the driver's seat, gasping heavily, and her brain was still recalling Choilina's words and the forage. He said to Gao Xiang in a low voice, "You just said that the ritual is related to the evil gods descending. What's going on?" Gao Xiang gritted his teeth and said in a low voice, "After I was caught, I heard them mention a few sentences. It seemed that the evil god was not accidental, but someone deliberately guided it. Choilina is the key figure. What she said is that the channel is about to open, real darkness will swallow everything. I didn't understand it very much, but I felt it was very bad." Junxi held his eyebrows and held the tablet tightly. "Channel? Dark? What the hell is this helping shattered?" He turned his head and looked out the window, and the Yuyun pressed lower, as if he had to swallow this ruin at any time. There was no anxiety in his heart. The evil god believers thought more than he thought, and the existence of Choilina made this battle even more dangerous. "No matter what, I'll get a life back today." Chen patted Gao Xiang's shoulder and relaxed a little easily. "You kid are lucky, don't give it to yourself next time." Don't worry, I'm not that easy to hang." Gao Xiang grinned, but immediately coughed for a few times, and Yang Wanning hurriedly let him lie down and rest. the atmosphere in the car finally became a little calmer, and several survivors also relaxed and began to discuss the just-in-the-fight in a low voice. Junxi did not participate in chatting, and his fingers flew quickly on the tablet to adjust the energy data of the fortress. Although the Thunder Shock mode is awesome, its energy consumption is too terrifying. After 3 consecutive days, 1/3 of its energy storage has been lost. He gritted his teeth and murmured in a low voice, "You have to find a place to replenish energy, otherwise you will be troubled if you encounter a tough battle next time." The fortress drove past a ruin and headed towards a safe place far away. The lights in the car are dim and yellow, reflecting the tired but desirable face of each survivor. Junxi looked at all this and secretly swore in her heart that no matter what evil god believers or any slander, no matter how big the secrets there were hidden behind Chuelina, he would use this fort to keep this final hope. A bloody red light flashed across the sky, like some ominous sign. The battle is still far away and a bigger storm is being curled. The mobile fort was parked next to a deserted gas station, surrounded by scattered oil barrels and scorched carriages, and the air was filled with a pungent smell of gasoline and iron lenses. The lights in the car were dim and several survivors were surrounded by each other, discussing their conversation with Chuelina in a low voice, and each of them was filled with fatigue and anxiety. Junxi leaned on the driver's seat, tapping his fingers quickly on the tablet, trying to find more traces about energy replenishment from the system data of the fortress. Gao Xiang's injury has been almost handled by Yang Wanting. He leaned against the wall. Although his face was pale, he still couldn't help but interrupt, "Brother, that woman is really not a good man. We have to think of a way earlier, otherwise we would have been killed by her. Do you play to death?" "I'll play to death first." Chen Zhen snorted coldly, the machete in his hand reflected a faint light, his eyes full of murderous air. His hatred for the evil god believers was almost engraved in his bones. Every time he mentioned Chuelina, his voice was filled with anger. Junxi didn't answer, her eyebrows were tightly locked, and the energy storage data displayed on the tablet made his heart sink. Although the Thunder Shock mode is awesome, its energy consumption is too terrifying. Now there is less than 1/3 of the reserve. If there is another tough battle, the castle may turn into a bunch of waste irons. He gritted his teeth and said in a low voice, "Energy is an urgent task. There is a lost military base nearby. The map shows that there may be a reserved energy core. We have to touch the air." "Military base?" "There are 80% lines of monsters, even evil god believers in that place." Chang'an's eyebrows were filled with doubts in his language. "Are you sure you want to take this risk?" "I don't have to choose, sit and wait for it to be even more dangerous." Junxi was calm and turned to the person in the car, "Who would like to go with me? If you don't go, the defense system of the fortress can keep you safe." Yang Wanting stood up and said in a low voice, "I'll go, I can help you whenever someone is injured." Gao Xiang grinned. Although he was still weak, he still took action. "I'll go too. Anyway, I owe you a life, so what will I do?" Chang'an pointed out, "I'm one of them, I haven't killed these shattered things yet." The other survivors in the car were talking to each other, and the middle-aged man muttered in a low voice, I'll stay, it's too dangerous outside." The young girl also said in a low voice, "I stay, too, we can't help." "Okay, you guard the car and don't run around." Junxi didn't say much, quickly jumped out of the car with Chen Zhen, Yang Wanting and Gao Xiang. The car in the fortress was clicked and the people who stayed behind could only watch their figures disappear into the ruins through the window. The military base was less than 3 kilometers away from the gas station, but the road in the ruins was terrible. There were collapsed ground and scattered bones. The 4 of them walked nearly an hour before they saw the broken wall of the base. The dry blood was hanging on the iron network, and there was a strange silence in the air, as if the wind was not afraid to blow into this dead land. "It doesn't look unfavorable, it's too peaceful." Chang'an held the machete tightly, his eyes slapped around him, and said in a low voice. Junxi clicked his head, took out the tablet, and adjusted the far-distance scanning function of the fortress. The screen showed that there were several faint heat sources inside the base, but it was hard to see what it was. He said in a low voice, "Touch in first, and then withdraw when you find the energy core, and don't fight. The 4 cats were lying on their waists and diamond through a gap in the wall. The inside of the base was even more in a mess, with broken military equipment and shells scattered on the ground, and several armored cars were burned into empty shells, as if they had experienced a fierce battle. Junxi led the head and walked along the mark on the map to a half-collapsed warehouse, where the energy core should be stored. As soon as I walked to the entrance of the warehouse, a low smile suddenly came from the darkness, carrying a strange sense of intimacy, as if I could drill into someone's brain. Little boys, I've met again. You really don't know how to live or die, and dare to come to my floor. Junxi suddenly turned around, the gun in her hand was loaded, and the sound was as cold as ice. Choi Lina, don't hide her head and reveal her tail, roll it out. Chang'an's hand holding the knife tightened slightly, and the murderous atmosphere in his eyes was almost overflowing. Yang Wanning and Gao Xiang also quickly entered the battle state, and their faces became difficult to see. With the sound, a woman in a long blood robe walked out from the depths of the valley, with complicated runes painted on her face, a sneer on the corner of her mouth, and holding the black stud in her hand. The ape-red stone on the head radiated an unsettling light. Choi Lina looked at the 4 people and spoke slowly. Junhee, your broken car is not around, and you still dare to be so tough. Do you really think you are the savior? Stop talking, what do you want to fuck? Junxi narrowed her eyes, pressed her fingers on the tablet, and prepared to call the fortress support at any time. Choi Lina smiled lightly, her stud slammed lightly, and a black fog suddenly spread out from the air. The ground around the 4 began to shake slightly, as if some kind of pose was about to start again. I don't want to fuck anything, I just give you a chance. Choi Lina's voice was like a venomous serpent, carrying a fatal inspiration. In the end of the world, it's a puppet, and the power of the evil god is the only way out. Join us, you can survive and even get more than imagined power. Junxi, your fortress is indeed good, but do you really think you can keep these wastes? Her eyes swept over Yang Wanning and Gao Xiang, and the smile on the corners of her mouth became deeper. Where are you? What's the good thing about following him? I'll be upset every day and may turn into monsters at any time. Follow me, I can keep you safe and even let your family live. Close your mouth. Chen Zhen growled, and the sword light flashed, slashing directly at Choi Lina, but a black light shot out from the staff, squeezing his attack. The shockwave shocked him to take a few steps back, his face blue. Choi Lina sneered, what's the hurry? I haven't finished talking about it yet. You, thank you, right? Your family was sacrificed by us. Don't you hate me? Join us and I can tell you the truth, and even let you take revenge. Chang'an's face became difficult to see in an instant, the machete in his hand trembled slightly, and his eyes were full of pricks. Junxi said in a low voice, don't listen to her, this woman is full of verbal words. But when his voice fell, Gao Xiang suddenly opened his mouth, his voice was low, wait, what she said is true. Junxi, we will survive with you, but we are fighting for life every day. I'm a little tired. Junxi suddenly turned his head, his eyes as cold as a knife. Gao Xiang, what do you mean? Gao Xiang lowered his head, avoiding his gaze, and his voice was filled with a slight hesitation. I'm not saying I want to betray, but if there is really a way to survive, why don't you try? Although the evil god believers are not good things, at least they have the strength. Yang Wanning was also stunned and said in a low voice, Gao Xiang, are you crazy? These people use living people as sacrifices. Have you forgotten how we escaped? Gao Xiang gritted his teeth and said nothing, but the movement in his eyes became more and more obvious. Choi Lina looked at this scene and smiled even more. Look, human nature is so fragile. Your trust is just a joke in the end of the world. Junxi, who can you believe? Junxi's heart sank, and his hand holding the gun tightened slightly, but he didn't show any panic on his face, but instead sneered, Choi Lina, do you think a few words can break us apart? Make a dream. He turned to Gao Xiang, his words were calm but unquestionable. Gao Xiang, I know you are afraid of death, who is not afraid? But think about it, what the evil god believers can give you is to use you as a chess piece and throw it away after it is squeezed dry. Have you seen who they let go? Gao Xiang was stunned for a moment, his face became even more slight. Junxi continued, follow me. I can't guarantee that you will be safe forever, but I can guarantee that as long as I am still alive, I will not give up anyone. Do you choose yourself? Should you believe me or this woman who has verbal words? Gao Xiang bit his teeth tightly and finally raised his head, and the movement in his eyes dissipated. Damn. I'm so pretty that my mother was almost washed away. Junxi, sorry, I chose the wrong way, but now I'm standing next to you. He pulled out his silent gun and shot Chuelina in a flash. Although she was knocked down by the black light, her attitude was already very clear. Chuelina's face finally became difficult to see, and she snorted coldly, a bunch of stupid goods, I'll give you a chance to not, so go and die. As soon as she slapped her stick, the black fog quickly spread out, and several huge black touches dripped out from the ground, carrying fishy mucus, and headed straight for the four people. At the same time, a low growl sounded around the warehouse, and more than a dozen deformed monsters emerged from the shadows, their eyes full of bloodthirsty crazy. Retreat! Retreat! Junxi growled, and his fingers flew on the tablet quickly. The movement castle remotely received the command, and the engine rushed towards the base quickly. Chang'an was in front of him, the sword light danced like a whirlwind. Each knife could break a monster's brain, and the blood was filled with it. Yang Wanning and Gao Xiang covered the back, although their firepower was limited, they could barely hold the monster. Room! The fortress finally arrived, and it crashed into the base like a giant iron beast, crushing several monsters. The car stopped in front of the four people, and the car door opened with a click. Junxi shouted, go on the car. Hurry! The four of them quickly diamonded in. The car door just closed, and a few touching hands hit the car hard, making a harsh metal collision sound, but the fortress's defense straps were not moving. Want to run? It's not that easy. Chuelina sneered, her stud was high, and the black fog condensed into a huge energy wave, and she rushed straight to the fortress and smashed it. Junxi gritted her teeth, pressed her fingers wildly on the control panel, and an emergency prevention mode prompt popped up on the screen. A blue electric arc suddenly appeared on the outer layer of the fortress, and the energy wave hit. Although the car was shaking, it held it back, and the arc turned back, forcing Chuelina to take a few steps back. Her face turned blue. This broken car is really interesting. Chuelina gritted her teeth, and there was a hint of hatred in her eyes, but she did not chase after her again, but quickly retreated back to the depths of the valley and disappeared into the black fog. The monster group lost its command and began to flee in all directions, and the base finally returned to its dead silence. In the car, the four of them were gasping heavily. Yang Wanning quickly checked everyone's injuries. Fortunately, they only had some injuries, and no one was seriously injured. Junxi leaned on the driving seat, wiped her sweat, turned her head and looked at Gao Xiang, calmingly speaking, I don't blame you for what happened just now. Who hasn't moved in the last days? But next time I have this kind of thought, remember to tell me the first time, don't hold it in yourself. Gao Xiang lowered his head and said in a low voice, thank you, brother. I didn't do it on purpose. I just felt hot and almost hurt everyone. Qingzhen patted his shoulder and said unhappily, stop talking, just live. I'll be fine. I'll break you the first time I'll break you. Gao Xiang smiled bitterly and said nothing more. Yang Wanning said in a low voice, Junxi, you just said it right. In the end of the world, trust is more important than anything else. We can live until now because you are here. There was a little gratitude in her eyes, which made the atmosphere in the car finally calm. Junxi didn't say much, and his fingers operated on the tablet to tune out the scan data of the fortress. Although the fight was surprising, he also unexpectedly discovered that there was a hidden energy core signal deep in the warehouse, which should be their goal. He said in a low voice, Chuelina ran away, but the energy core is still there. We can't do it in vain, Gao Xiang, you and Qingzhen come with me to get it, Yang Wanning stays behind. The three of them got off the car quickly and returned to the warehouse carefully. Sure enough, a military energizer box was found under a pile of slaughter, with an energy core as big as a fist, emitting a faint blue light. Junxi grinned. This thing can make the fortress bear another half a month, and the weather is good. After returning to the fortress, Junxi quickly connected the core to the system, showing the energy storage on the screen that it quickly rebounded, and a new prompt came out. When the system detects the high energy core, does it unlock the upgrade module? He raised his eyebrows and pointed his finger, and a new option was unveiled on the screen. Particle gun system, a high-energy focusing weapon, with a wide range of attacks, and a strong destruction force, suitable for large-scale battles. Damn, this thing is awesome when you hear it. Chang'en's eyes lit up after coming. Junxi clicked his head and pressed confirm upgrade with his finger. The system started to automatically install the module. The top of the fortress stretched out a turret with cold light. A low-frequency buzzing sound spread in the air, as if it could tear everything apart at any time. Try the power. Junxi operated the fort, pressed the firing key against a ruin outside the base. A white beam of light sprayed out, instantly blew the ruins into scorched earth. The explosion shaking the ground trembled. Several monsters left far away were directly blown away by the airwaves, and there was no residue left. It's great. Lina has to kneel down again when she comes here. Gao Xiang couldn't help but roar, and the haze on her face sniffed. Chen Zhen grinned. If this thing had been available earlier, we wouldn't have been so bad. Yang Wanning also relaxed her voice and said in a low voice, with this, we will have a greater chance of survival. Junxi leaned on the seat, slight squinted on the corner of her mouth, but there was a cold light hidden deep in her eyes. Although Lina's confusion was resolved, the information she exposed made him uneasy. The truth about the evil gods descending, the opening of the passage, these words seemed to be rifts on the top, and could fall down at any time. He murmured in a low voice, no matter what you have behind you, I will crush you. The fortress engine was low and drove away from this bloody and strange military base. The atmosphere in the car was a little lighter than before. Several survivors started chatting in low voices, and occasionally they could hear a few laughs. Junxi looked at all this and swore in her heart that no matter how many storms there were before, he would keep this final hope. Along the sky, the clouds are lower, and there is nothing bigger about memorizing. Lina's smile seemed to be still clamoring in her ears, as if it was the last warning to them. The battle is still far away and a bigger challenge is waiting ahead. The mobile fort was parked near a deserted ruin, and the low sound of the engine was particularly heavy in the night. The sky was almost breathless by the heavy clouds, and there was a bloody light flash from afar, like an ominous sign. Inside the car, Junxi leaned against the driver's seat, and his fingers flew on the tablet. A huge red signal source was displayed on the screen, located just deep in the ruins, less than 2 kilometers away from them. That was the core point of the evil god believer discovered during an investigation a few days ago, and it was also the location of Lina's final ritual of sacrificial. This time I'm not a small fight. There are hundreds of believers, monster groups, and maybe even Lina herself is hosting it. Junxi said in a low voice. His speech was calm but with a hint of coldness. If we fail this battle, we will have to be defeated by the entire army. Chen Zhen leaned against the wall of the car, and the machete in his hand reflected a faint light, his eyes full of murder. No matter how many people he is, I have been waiting for this day for a long time. Lina and her dog legs don't even want to run away today. His voice was as low as if it was pulled out of a tooth, and the flames of revenge were almost burning through his rationality. Yang Wanning was checking her medical bag. When she heard this, she raised her head and said in a low voice, we have few people, and it's too dangerous to fight hard. Junxi, is there any other way? Her face was a little pale, but her eyes were still determined, and she was obviously ready to save people at any time. There is no other way. If the ritual of the sacrificial ceremony is completed, the power of the evil god will completely subside. Don't say that all the survivors in the entire ruins area will be finished. Junxi shook his head and turned to Gao Xiang. What pass did they mention before? Are there more details? Gao Xiang gritted his teeth and said in a low voice, when I was caught, I heard a few sentences. They said that the sacrificial priest is a channel connecting the body of the evil god. Once the ritual is completed and the passage is open, the evil god will surrender to himself and bring true darkness. They also said, all this is guided by humans. The surrender to the last days is not an accident, but a bigger sarcasm. Chuelina is just a piece on the chessboard. Check-in? Ching-en sneered and tightened his hand slightly. No matter whether she is a chess piece or a chess player, today I will split her in 2.5. There was a hint of crazy flashing in his eyes, and it was obvious that the revenge had already suppressed everything. Junxi didn't answer, and clicked his finger on the tablet for a few minutes, and a prompt "Complete System Upgrade Completed" popped up on the screen. The energy core obtained at the military base a few days ago not only supplemented the energy of the fortress, but also unraveled the final situation, the Doomsday Judgment mode. This mode can push all systems in the fortress to the extreme, improve defense, firepower, and motor performance in an all-round way, and even explode the attack power of the sky and earth in a short time, but the price is that energy consumption is extremely fast, and it may take several days to recover after a fight. He gritted his teeth and said in a low voice, "In this battle, the fortress must be done with all your might. You are all ready, no one can guarantee that you will escape unstoppable." When the survivors in the car heard this, the atmosphere instantly suppressed. The middle-aged man muttered in a low voice, Can we not go? This sounds like a death." The young girl also said in a low voice, "I don't want to die, I really don't want to die. If you are afraid of death, close your mouth and stay." Chen Zhen glanced at them coldly and said to Junxi, "Don't worry about these wastes, we'll be fine in a few." Yang Wanning pointed, "I'll go with you, and the injured person will hand it over to me." Gao Xian grinned, "I owe you a life, how can I not go? I'm counting as me." Junxi pointed and quickly ordered, "The people who stayed behind locked the door, and the defense system automatically started. Don't run around. Everyone else is ready to fight with me." He stepped on the gas door with one foot, and the engine of the fortress rose up, like a giant steel iron beast, heading towards the sacrificial supreme deep in the ruins at full speed. The distance between 2 kilometers was instantly reached, and the fortress stopped beside a huge deserted building. In front of it was a giant sacrificial fort made up of skeletons and blood-colored runes. There was a strong fishy smell in the air, like a mixture of rotten and evil. Around the sacrificial sutra, dozens of black-robed believers were lying in circles, chanting strange mantras in their mouths, and the runes on the ground were flashing with the red light, as if they were torn apart the space at any time. Outside the sacrificial supreme, groups of deformed monsters wandered, with a large number of them numbing their skin, and their claws and fangs flashing coldly in the dark. "Come on, little sluts." Chuelina's voice came from the top of the sacrificial priest, carrying a sarcasm and a sneer. She stood at the highest point of the fortress, her long bloody robe swaying in the wind, and the black stud in her hand emitted an unsettling light. A few high-level believers guarded her, with runes painted on her face and crazy eyes. "Chuelina, today is your death." Chen Zhen growled, his hand holding the knife was already shaking, and his hatred was almost about to penetrate his chest. Junxi patted his shoulder and said in a low voice, "Don't urge, break her defense first, the sacrificial priest is the key." He pressed his fingers wildly on the tablet, and a red warning of Doomsday Judgment Mode starts popped up on the screen. The fortress's body shook violently, the outer armor began to deform, 2 huge particle cannons extended from the top, and a row of small guide launchers were spread out on the side wings, and the whole car emitted a kind of air that destroyed the sky and the earth. "Damn, this condition is too bad." Gao Xiang couldn't help but roar, his eyes lit up. Yang Wanning held the medical bag tightly and said in a low voice, "No matter how much you are, remember not to fight hard. I don't want to collect it for you." Chen Zhen didn't say anything, but the murder in his eyes was already so full that it couldn't be dissolved. "Go up and crush them." Junxi shouted and pushed down the slug. The fortress was like a black flashing into the slug. The particle cannon was launched directly locked into the monster group outside the sacrificial for the first time. "Gee!" Bai Feng's beam of light sprayed out, and in an instant, dozens of monsters were blown into coke. The explosion of the impact made the ground tremble, and the air seemed to be torn apart. The group of monsters roared, but more monsters rushed out of the darkness, rushing towards the castle as if they were desperate. Shooting system, shoot! Junxi's fingers quickly operated, and the guide bullet and gun on the side wing of the fortress opened fire at the same time. The subgun and small guide bullets emerged like rainstorms. The monster group was beaten to the point of flying flesh and blood, and could not get close to them at all. The black-robed believers outside the fort finally responded. Several high-level believers raised their staff and recited strange mantras in their mouths. The black fog rose from the ground to form a thick barrier to try to capture the firepower of the fortress. Take a trick! Junxi sneered, and the particle cannon was charged again, and this time it directly locked the black fog barrier. A larger beam of light emerged, tearing apart the black fog. The explosion of the impact caused several believers to fly directly, and the blood fog spread out, and the defenses outside the sacrificial for a huge hole in an instant. It's great! This firepower is so simple! Gao Xiang shouted, and the excitement on his face could not be hidden. Chen Zhen gritted his teeth and said in a low voice, "Don't let the wind, the real toughness is behind the back. Troilina hasn't taken action yet." His voice fell. Troilina at the top of the fort finally moved. She raised her stud, and her voice was as cold as ice. "A group of stupid goods, think that a big deal can destroy me with a broken car? Let you see the real power." With her voice, the blood-colored runes on the fort suddenly became dazzling, and the ground was shaking violently. Several huge black touching hands were diamond from the ground. Each touching hands were as thick as a bucket, covered with sticky black liquid, and rushed to the fortress with a destructive force. At the same time, more monsters emerged from all directions, with a large number of them as if they were invisible, and their roars made people's eardrums hurt. Anti-preventive mode, extremely limited. Junxi gritted his teeth, pressed a red button with his finger, and a thick blue arc appeared on the outer layer of the fortress. His touching hand hit him. Although the car was shaking, he held it back. The arc rolled back, burning the surface of several touching hands, and the fishy smell instantly spread out. "Teacher, prepare to get off the car and fuck those high-level believers. The ritual of the sacrificial ritual depends on you to destroy it." Junxi shouted, and at the same time, he adjusted the particle cannon and locked Troilina at the top of the sacrificial. He knew that he was not afraid of fighting hard for the fire fort, but if the ceremonial was completed, everything would be finished. Chang'an clicked his head, and his hand holding the knife trembled slightly. It was not because of fear, but because of the excitement and hatred. "Tell me, today I will slaughter all these fragments." The car door opened with a click sound. Chen Zhen pulled out of the car like a shadow. His body was so fast that he left the fog. The machete in his hand carried the cold light and headed straight for the high-level believers outside the sacrificial accord. His battles were simply changed, and he could predict almost every move of the other party. With a flash of sword, he directly slashed the brain of a believer, and blood was sprayed. The monster tried to cut it, but his speed was too fast and his sword skills were fierce and accurate. Every time he took a knife, he could take a life and kill a bloody path. "Yang Wanting, Gao Xiang, cover him!" Junxi roared. His fingers did not stop, and the particle cannon emerged in the third time, and this time he headed straight for Troilina. The explosion of the shock wave made the top of the sacrificial supreme tremble, but a black light barrier suddenly appeared in front of Troilina, and she forced her attack. She sneered, "Little crazy, the firepower is good, but I'm still far away from me. Damn, this woman is so hard." Junxi gritted her teeth, and the anti-warning arc of the fortress started again, barely resisting the energy wave, but the car body was still shaken, and the energy storage dropped rapidly. He knew that the limit of the Doomsday Trial mode was not long, so he had to fight quickly. On the other side, Chen Zhen had already killed the middle of the sacrificial forum. The black-robed believers and monsters around him seemed to be desperate, but his sword skills were as fast as a whirlwind, and no one could get close to him. He suddenly noticed a believer wearing a deep red robe standing on the side of the fort, holding a blood-colored crystal in his hand and chanting a mantra in his mouth, like a key figure in the ritual. Chang'an's eyes turned cold and he gritted his teeth and growled, "It's you. I think you are the mess that killed my family." The believer heard the sound and turned his head to see the face became difficult to see. "It's you? That little surviving snail? Why might he still be alive?" There was a terror in his voice, but he quickly put on his staff, and the black fog condensed into a spike, heading straight for Chang'an. "Go to die." Chang'an growled, his figure flashed, and he avoided the spikes. The sword light slashed through a perfect arc and directly hit the believer's chest. The blood column sprayed out, and the guy fell down before he even screamed. The blood-colored crystal in his hand fell to the ground, making a sound of crispness. As the crystal stone shattered, the rune light on the fort suddenly dimmed, and the shaking on the ground became weaker, and the stance was obviously broken. "Fuck beautifully." Junxi couldn't help but yell when she saw this scene through monitoring. He quickly operated the fortress, and the particle cannon and the guide system opened fire at the same time, and the firepower was fully opened, and the group of monsters outside the sacrificial fortress and the black-robed believers were blown into scorched earth. Although the touch is still attacking, its power is obviously weakening, and the defensive arc of the fort can barely withstand it. Lina saw this, her face turned blue and gritted her teeth and shouted, "A group of wastelands, even several small horns can't hold it." She held her stud high, and a low buzz suddenly came from the air. The runes on the fort lighted up again, as if they were in a sprinting speeding stance. Junxi's heart sank, and he glanced at the energy data. The last 3 minutes left in the doomsday trial mode. He gritted his teeth and said in a low voice, "There's no time, I'll blow up all my strength and blow up the Supreme." He pressed his fingers wildly on the control panel, and a warning of final overload attack popped up on the screen. All the energy in the fortress instantly gathered on the particle cannon, and a dazzling white light radiated from the muzzle, and a burnt smell spread in the air. Lina obviously felt that she was not in a match. Her face changed drastically, and she quickly condensed the black light barrier, and she shouted, "Stop them. You can't stop the stance. Go to your mother's ritual." Junxi shouted and pressed the ejaculation key. The particle cannon emitted a deafening sound of thunder. The white light column rushed straight to the top of the fort like a thunder, tearing apart the black light barrier. The explosion of the impact caused the entire fort to break into pieces. Lina was blown away by the airwaves and smashed hard to the ground, spitting out a mouthful of blood, her face as white as paper. At the moment when the sacrificial sank, the ground no longer shook, the blood-colored runes were extinguished, and the evil breath in the air quickly dissipated. The monster group seemed to have lost its command and began to flee in all directions. The remaining black-robed believers were also shocked and ran away from the ground. Chang'an stood in the sacrificial bones, covered in blood, and the machete in his hand was still dripping blood. He looked at the believer who was chopped to death by him, and finally let out a long breath and murmured in a low voice, "Dad, Mother, I'll take revenge on you." The energy reserves of the fortress are almost complete, the doomsday judgment mode automatically closes, the car stops, and the particle cannon is blazing with smoke, as if it has just experienced a destructive battle. Junxi leaned on the seat, wiped her sweat, looked at Chang'an through the monitoring, and grinned, "Brother, fuck beautifully." Chang'an didn't say anything, but just pointed a little, and the murder in his eyes finally dissipated a little, replaced by a difficult-to-speaking silence. Gao Xiang and Yang Wanning got off the car quickly and helped Chang'an back to the fortress. Yang Wanning checked his injuries and said in a low voice, "You are too hard, there are so many injuries on your body, but fortunately they are not deep." Chang'an grinned and said, "Little injuries, it's worth it." Lina stomped up from the ground, covered in blood, her eyes filled with hatred. "Junxi, you have ruined my big deal, but this is just the beginning. The evil god's passage has opened a corner, and the real darkness will swallow you long ago." Her voice was crazy, and she turned around and disappeared deep into the ruins. Junxi, without chasing, the energy in the fortress is almost exhausted, and the force will only be completely defeated. He said to Gao Xiang in a low voice, "She just said that the passage has opened a corner, what does it mean?" Gao Xiang gritted his teeth and said in a low voice, I guess, although the slogan was cut off, the power of the evil god has penetrated a part of it. Junxi's heart sank and turned to look at the sky. Sure enough, there were tiny cracks in the clouds far away, emitting unsettling black light. He gritted his teeth and said in a low voice, whatever it is, we at least stopped most of her plans today. Go back and rest, and then find out the truth about this passage next. The storm was driving away from this bloody and deadly building. The atmosphere in the car was a little lighter than before, but everyone knew that the victory was only temporary. Lina is still alive, the evil god's tragedy is still continuing, and a greater storm is waiting ahead. Junxi held the tablet tightly and swore in his heart that no matter what was hidden behind the passage, he would use this fort to crush all threats and keep this final hope. The mobile castle was parked near a dead ruin, and the low sound of the engine was particularly heavy in the night. The sky was almost breathless by the heavy clouds, and the tiny black crack far away was emitting an unsettling light, as if the eyes of the evil god were judging this broken earth. Inside the car, Junxi leaned on the driving seat, and her fingers quickly hit the tablet. The screen showed the energy fluctuation data of the crack position. The value was too high, which could almost be determined that it was the channel in Lina's mouth, and it was also the source of the penetration of the evil god's power. If you don't get this thing done, we will never have a peaceful life. Junxi said in a low voice, his language calm but with a hint of coldness. He turned to look at the teammates inside the car. Chen Zhen leaned against the wall and wiped the machete, and the murderous air in his eyes could not be dissolved. Yang Wanning was sorting out her medical bag, her face was pale but her eyes were firm. Gao Xiang checked the silenced gun in his hand and grinned, as if he was ready to fight desperately at any time. The last time the sacrificial war, Lina ran away, but she was definitely near the passage. Gao Xiang said in a low voice, with a little hatred in his voice. I heard that the passage is the core of the evil god's power. As long as the passage is not closed, the evil god can constantly penetrate the power, and may even completely surrender. She will definitely try her best to defend this place. Then you have to kill her even more. Chen Zhen gritted his teeth, his hand holding the knife trembled slightly. It was not fear, but the thought of revenge was burning again. No matter whether it is the passage or the evil god, I will smash it all today. His voice was as low as the roar of a wild beast, and his hatred almost broke through his chest. Yang Wanning raised her head and said in a low voice, Junxi, we don't have much energy reserves anymore. The last doomsday trial mode was almost exhausted, and now we are barely recovering to halfway. If we have another tough battle, can we hold it? Her concern was unreasonable. The fortress was their biggest trump card, but the energy problem has always been a tough problem. Junxi pointed his head, his eyebrows were slightly snaked, but immediately grinned, if you can't hold it, you have to be squeezed. If you don't fight this battle, we really have no chance. I've found a temporary energy compression solution in the system, which can push the storage to the limit in a short time, but the price is that the backpacker pressure may have to be stopped for several days. But, it's worth it. He pressed his fingers wildly on the tablet, and a red warning of emergency energy compression popped up on the screen. The fort engine shook violently, and the low sound became even more rapid, as if he was about to burst out all his strength at any time. After a few flashes of lights in the car, the energy data quickly climbed to nearly full value. Everything is ready. This time, it's not just a fight, but a problem must be solved thoroughly. Junxi turned his head to look at his teammates, his temperament was unquestionable. The passage must be closed, Lina must die, and the power of the evil god must be cleared. Whoever wants to retreat, now, staying behind will not be lost. Chen Zhen sneered and said, get back. I have been waiting for this day for too long. Who is going to leave? Who is going to leave? Gao Xiang grinned and said, I owe you a life. Why don't you go back? I'm just me. Yang Wanning pointed a little and said, I won't retreat. The injured man handed me over. Don't worry. The other survivors in the car were talking to each other, and the middle-aged man muttered in a low voice, I'll stay, it's too dangerous outside. The young girl also said in a low voice, "We can't help you, stay." "Okay, the car door is locked, the defense system automatically starts, don't run around." Junxi didn't say much, quickly jumped out of the car with Chen, Yang Wanning and Gao Xiang. The car door in the fort closed with a click sound, and the people who stayed behind could only watch them walk towards the darkness through the window. The passage is located at the deepest part of the ruins, a wasteland covered by evil spirits, and the air around it seemed to be polluted, with a pungent smell of fishy smell. Far away, the black crack was emitting strange black light, and the ground around it was covered with blood-colored runes, like some huge stance. Below the crack, hundreds of black-robed believers surrounded themselves in a circle, chanting strange mantras in their mouths, and a low buzzing sound came from the air, as if the space itself was shaking. The group of monsters wandered outside the ceremonial scene, which made people's skin numb, and their claws and fangs flashed coldly in the dark. "Come on, little boys." Chuelina's voice came from below the crack, with a sneer and confusion. She stood in the middle of the ceremonial hall, her long bloody robe swaying in the wind, her black stud in her hand was radiating awesome light, her face was covered with runes, and her eyes were full of crazy. Beside her, several high-level believers were guarding her, and the evil breath radiated from her body was stronger than ever. "Chuelina, I'll kill you today." Chen growled, his hand holding the knife was already shaking, and his hatred almost burned his reason. Junxi patted his shoulder and said in a low voice, "Don't urge, break her defense first, the passage is the key. I will use the firepower of the fortress to open the road. If you find a chance, you will take Chuelina directly." He pressed his finger on the tablet, and the fortress's engine rushed up, and the car body shook violently. The particle cannon on the top and the guide system of the side wings opened at the same time. The whole car emitted a kind of air that would destroy the sky and the earth. "Damn, this situation is still so good." Gao Xiang couldn't help but roar, his eyes lit up. Yang Wanning held the medical bag tightly and said in a low voice, "Don't slut, remember to protect yourself. I don't want to collect the bin for you." Chen didn't say anything, but just clicked a little, and the murder in his eyes was as heavy as ink. "Go up and crush them." Junxi shouted and pushed down the slug. The castle was like a black flashing into the stairs. The particle cannon was directly locked in the group of monsters outside when it first launched. "Gee!" Bai Feng's beam of light sprayed out, and in an instant, dozens of monsters were blown into coke. The explosion of the impact made the ground tremble, and the air seemed to be torn apart. The group of monsters roared, but more monsters rushed out of the darkness, rushing towards the castle as if they were desperate. The guide system, firepower is fully opened. Junxi's fingers were flying quickly, and the small guide on the side wings of the fortress emerged like a heavy rain. The monster group was blown away and could not be approached at all. The black-robed believers in the ceremony finally responded. Several high-level believers raised their staff and recited strange mantras in their mouths. The black fog rose from the ground to form a thick barrier to try to capture the firepower of the fortress. "Take a trick!" Junxi sneered, and the particle cannon was charged again, and this time it directly locked the black fog barrier. A larger beam of light emerged, tearing apart the black fog. The explosion of the impact caused several believers to fly directly, and the blood fog spread out, and the defense outside the cemetery was instantly torn apart. "It's great! This firepower is so simple!" Gao Xiang yelled, unable to hide the excitement on his face. Chen gritted his teeth and said in a low voice, "Don't let the wind, the real toughness is behind the scenes. Chuelina hasn't taken action yet." His voice fell, Chuelina finally moved. She raised her stud, and her voice was as cold as ice. "A group of stupid goods, think that a big deal can harm me with a broken car? Let you see the true power of the evil god." As her voice, the cracks suddenly lit up a dazzling black light, and the ground was shaking violently. Several huge black touches were diamond from the ground. Each touch was as thick as a bucket, covered with sticky black liquid, and rushed to the fortress with a destructive force. At the same time, more monsters emerged from all directions, with a large number of them as if they were invisible, and their roars made people's eardrums hurt. In the crack, a more intense evil breath spread out, as if some more terrifying existence was about to descend. Anti-preventive mode, extremely limited. Junxi gritted his teeth, pressed a red button with his finger, and a thick blue arc appeared on the outer layer of the fortress. His touching hand hit him. Although the car was shaking, he held it back. The arc rolled back, burning the surface of several touching hands, and the fishy smell instantly spread out. Chang'an, prepare to get off the car and fuck Choilina. The passage must be destroyed by you. Junxi shouted, and at the same time adjusted the particle cannon, locking the high-level believers under the crack. He knew that he was not afraid of fighting hard for the fire fort, but if the ceremonial was completed, everything would be finished. Chang'an clicked his head, his hand holding the knife trembled slightly, not because of fear, but because of the urge to communicate with hatred. Thank you to me, today I will split this woman in 2.5. The door opened with a click sound. Chang'an pulled out of the car like a shadow, his figure was so fast that he left. The machete in his hand carried a cold light and headed straight for Choilina in the center of the ceremonial venue. His battles were simply changed, and he could predict almost every move of the other party. With a flash of sword, he directly slashed the brain of a high-level believer, and blood was sprayed. The monster tried to cut it, but his speed was too fast and his sword skills were fierce and accurate. Every time he took a knife, he could take a life and kill a bloody path. Yang Wanding, Gao Xiang, cover him! Junxi roared, his fingers did not stop, and the particle cannon emerged in the third time, and this time he headed straight for Choilina. The explosion of the shock wave made the ceremonial scene tremble, but a black light barrier suddenly appeared in front of Choilina, and she forced her attack. She sneered, little crazy, the firepower is good, but I'm still far away from me. She slapped her stick, and more touches drew from the ground, and at the same time, the black fog condensed into an energy wave and rushed straight to the fortress. Damn, this woman is so hard. Junxi gritted her teeth, and the anti-warning arc of the fortress started again, barely resisting the energy wave, but the car body was still shaken, and the energy storage dropped rapidly. He knew that the limit on emergency energy compression was not much, so he had to fight quickly. On the other side, Chang'an had already killed the center of the ceremonial hall. The black-robed believers and monsters around him seemed to be desperate, but his sword skills were as fast as whirlwinds, and no one could get close to him. He stared at Choilina with his teeth and roared, Choilina, I'll calculate everything about my family that you're to kill me today. His voice was filled with hatred, and the sword light led the sound of the broken air and headed straight for her neck. Choilina sneered, and with a blow of her power, a black light turned into a sharp blade to meet Chang'an's machete. The two forces collided, and the impact waves shocked the monsters around her. There was a hint of disdain in her eyes. Little crazy, I hate you, but do you think you can hurt me? Your family is just a sacrifice, and it is their blessing to die. Her words pierced Chang'an's heart like a knife, which made his eyes red. Go to your mother's blessing. Chang'an growled, his figure flashed, and he avoided the black light. The sword light plotted a perfect arc and directly hit Choilina's shoulder. The blood was rising, and she screamed, stumbled back, and her face became difficult to see in an instant. You, dare you hurt me? There was a sense of shock in her voice, and it was obvious that Chang'an could break through her defense. Take you? I'll take your life. Chang'an gritted his teeth, his swordsmanship was faster and more ruthless, and he slashed out several times, forcing Choilina to use black light to resist. There were a few more wounds on her body, and the blood was flowing. Gao Xiang and Yang Wanning covered up behind the scenes, and the silent guns and the bombs that were temporarily modified were thrown out, reluctantly dragging the monsters and believers around them to fight for Chang'an. Junxi saw this scene through monitoring and gritted her teeth and growled, good. Add a move and kill her. He pressed his fingers on the control panel, and the particle cannon and the guide system opened fire, and the group of monsters and black-robed believers outside the cemetery were blown into scorched earth. Although the touch is still attacking, its power is obviously weakening, and the defensive arc of the fort can barely withstand it. Lina was forced to retreat by Chang'an, and finally she showed a panic and gritted her teeth and shouted, "Do you think you can win this way? The power of the evil god has subsided, and the passage is irreversible." Her power was high, and the black light in the cracks suddenly flourished, and a more terrifying evil breath spread out, as if some huge existence was about to break out of the air. The ground was shaking violently, and the runes in the center of the ceremonial are dazzling. A low roar came from the air, which made people's head numb. No, the passage is going to be completely opened. Junxi's heart sank, and he glanced at the energy data. The limit of emergency compression was only last minute. He gritted his teeth and said in a low voice, "No time, I'll hit it with all my strength," and the cracks exploded. He pressed a red button with his finger, and a warning of final overload attack popped up on the screen. All the energy in the fortress instantly gathered on the particle cannon, and a dazzling white light radiated from the muzzle, and a burnt smell spread in the air. "Celebrate, retreat. I'm going to use my ultimate move," Junxi yelled, and at the same time, he operated the castle to adjust the direction, and the particle cannon directly locked the crack. Chen Zhen heard the sound, and the sword flashed, forcing Lina back again, quickly stepped back a few steps, and avoided the attack range. Lina saw this, her face changed drastically, and she quickly condensed the black light barrier, and she shouted, "Stop them! You can't stop this stance. Go to your mother's ritual." Junxi shouted and pressed the ejaculation key. Ah! Lina was blown away by the waves and hit the ground hard, spitting out a mouthful of blood, her face as white as paper. Her staff was blown to pieces, and the runes on her body began to disintegrate, and the evil breath quickly disappeared from her body, as if she had lost the source of her power. She slammed and got up, her eyes filled with hatred and reluctance. "Junxi, you ruined everything. What's ruined is your shit plan." Chang'an growled, his figure flashed, and the sword light brought the last hatred, heading straight to Lina's chest. Her black light barrier was broken and could not resist at all. The tip of the knife pierced her body, and the blood column sprayed out. She widened her eyes, let out an unwilling roar, and finally fell down, no longer silence. At the moment when the stairs collapsed, the ground no longer shook, the blood-colored runes were extinguished, and the evil breath in the air quickly dissipated. The monster group seemed to have lost its command and began to flee in all directions. The remaining black-robed believers were also shocked and ran away from the ground. Chen Zhen stood beside Lina's body, covered in blood, and the machete in his hand was still dripping blood. He let out a long breath and murmured in a low voice, "Dad, Mom, I'm really revenged this time." The energy reserves of the fortress are almost complete, the emergency compression mode automatically closes, the car stops, and the particle cannon is blazing with white smoke, as if it has just experienced a destructive battle. Junxi leaned on the seat, wiped her sweat, looked at Chen Zhen through the monitoring, and grinned, "Brother, fuck beautifully." Chen Zhen didn't say anything, but just pointed a little, and the murder in his eyes finally scattered, replaced by a difficult-to-speaking slightness. Gao Xiang and Yang Wanning ran over quickly and helped Chen Zhen back to the fortress. Yang Wanning checked his injuries and said in a low voice, "You are too hard, there are so many injuries on your body, but fortunately they are not deep." Chen Zhen grinned and said, "Little injuries, it's worth it." The clouds in the sky began to scatter, and a long-lasting ray of sunlight shone out from the cloud layer, scattered on this ruin filled with skeletons and blood. The crack disappeared completely, and the evil breath could no longer be felt, as if the world finally wiped out a certain curse. Junxi jumped out of the car, stood on the ruins, and took a deep breath. Although the air was still smelly, there was still a fresh smell. "We win?" Gao Xiang couldn't believe it, and asked in a low voice, with a little trembling sound. Yang Wanning pointed her head, and a light flashed in her eyes. "I won, I really won. The power of the evil god is gone, we can survive." Her voice choked, as if the emotions that had been suppressed for too long were finally released. Junxi turned to look at them and grinned, "It's not just a win, we've brought hope to this ruin. The evil god is gone, the passage is closed, and the remaining monsters and believers are just warriors." It's a long time since they can be clean and clean. He patted Chang'an's shoulder and said with a firm voice, "Brother, your hatred is reported. Next, we have to think about how to rebuild everything." Chang'an pointed, and there was a hint of warmth in his eyes. "Rebuild. Okay, I will always give those who survived it." Gao Xiang grinned and said, Am I a hero too? I have to blow my head when I go back." Yang Wanning wiped the corners of her eyes and said with a smile, "You are all heroes, the sayings and the end of the world." A few days later, the mobile castle was parked at a relatively safe ruin site, and more survivors gathered around them, hearing the news that the evil god's power was destroyed. They came from all corners, carrying long-lasting hope on their faces. Junxi and his teammates began to organize everyone to clean up the ruins and build temporary shelters. Although the fortress consumes enough energy, it is still the best fortification and has become the core of the point. Chang'an is no longer the killing revenge. He began to teach the survivors basic fighting skills, and occasionally smiled. Yang Wanning became a serious medical responsibilities, busy treating the injured every day and bringing warmth to people. Gao Xiang collected information from all over the place to help plan resource allocation, but he was still so inappropriate, but he never was vague when he started to live. Junxi stood on the top of the fortress, looking at the busy crowd below, feeling mixed emotions. He looked down at the tablet, and the screen showed that the energy of the fortress was recovering slowly. Although it still took time, it was no longer important. The shadow of the evil god dissipated, and although the world was still full of devastated eyes, the sun finally shone into this ruin. "Brothers, our names will be spread throughout this land soon," Junxi said in a low voice, and the corners of his mouth slightly raised. He turned around and looked away. Under the sun, there was a little greenness in the ruins, as if life was sprouting again. He knew that although the battle ended, a new challenge had just begun. However, no matter what the future holds, he and this team have become an unlucky saying in the end of the world, bringing the light of hope to all survivors.